For almost 40 years, he was the absolute center of gravity for the Islamic Republic of Iran. His picture was everywhere, his power felt total, and then, in just one morning, he was gone. So today, we're going to break down what happens when a figure like Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is suddenly assassinated.
But we're not talking about a natural disaster here. No, this was a political earthquake, one with the power to totally redraw the map of an entire region. And the thing that set it off wasn't some act of God. It was a cold, calculated act of war. Just think about that. 36 years, a whole generation of Iranians had never known another ultimate authority. So his sudden, violent death didn't just leave a power vacuum. It basically shattered the foundation of the state he had built in his own image. Right, so these are the big questions we really have to get into. We're going to look at the operation itself, try to get inside the head of the man who ruled for so long, and then explore the absolute chaos he left in his wake. Okay, let's dive right in. Because to understand any of the fallout, you have to start with the event itself, a day that was just a whirlwind of confusion, denials, and then, finally, a stunning confirmation. So, the day kicks off with the sound of explosions. By noon, the whole world is just caught in this fog of war, right? You've got Tehran on one side insisting he's safe and sound, while at the same time, Washington and Jerusalem are basically already claiming a successful hit. It took until the early hours of the next day for the official story to finally break. The supreme leader was dead. And once that initial chaos started to clear, the details that came out were, well, they were chillingly clear. This wasn't a random event. This was a meticulously planned decapitation strike, a joint op between Israel's Mashhad and the CIA. And the outcome? It was brutally effective. Khomeini, along with 7 others, including some family members, were all killed in the strike on his compound. But here's the thing. The impact of his death is completely tied to the story of his life. To really get what Iran has lost, or for many, what it's been freed from, we have to understand the man himself. He was a master at crafting his own personal narrative. He was born into a pretty modest religious family, and he always played up this story of his humble beginnings, a life of piety over wealth, just bread and raisins. And this was a really key part of his public image, something designed to make him relatable to his revolutionary base. His early years were just this trial by fire of resistance. He was arrested 6 different times, spent years in prison, was tortured. And these experiences, they didn't just turn him into a revolutionary. They forged this core belief deep inside him that the West and its allies were a permanent, existential enemy. And then, the event that would really define the rest of his life. In the early, chaotic years after the revolution, an assassination attempt nearly killed him. A bomb and a tape recorder went off right next to him, and the injury to his right arm became this constant, visible symbol of his survival against all odds. And this is how he learned to turn trauma into pure political power. That attack basically made him a living martyr, which, in his mind, confirmed his deep-seated paranoia. For Khamenei, the idea that the world was conspiring against him, that wasn't just rhetoric, it was a reality he felt was proven by his own scars.
So here's the crucial thing to understand about him. Compromise was never really an option. For Khamenei, resistance wasn't a strategy you pull out during a negotiation. It was who he was. It was his identity. To give in on any point was, to him, a kind of personal and national death sentence.
So how does a man with that kind of psychology build a state that's not just designed to govern, but to survive at all costs? Well, he built a fortress, really. One resting on 3 pillars: ideology, military power, and fear. At the absolute core of his power is this concept, vilayat-e-faqih. You can think of it as the theological bedrock of the Islamic Republic. It's this idea that gives the supreme leader not just political power, but a divine mandate to rule as essentially God's representative on earth. It lifts his authority way beyond just politics. But, of course, ideology needs an army. And for Khamenei, that army was the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. They were his sword and his shield. I mean, they're way more than just a military. The IRGC is practically a state within the state. They answer only to him, they control huge chunks of the Iranian economy, they run the missile program, and through their elite Quds force, they export his revolutionary vision all across the Middle East. Honestly, they were the absolute cornerstone of his rule. So, what happens when the man at the very center of this massive fortress is killed? How did his people react? Well, the answer shows a nation that is just completely torn in two.
The reaction was like a perfect split screen of a divided country. On one side, you had open celebrations. People were in the streets cheering, and in one town, they even pulled down a statue of him. But on the other side, you saw this profound grief. Thousands gathered to mourn, and a red flag of revenge was raised over a holy mosque, which is a really potent symbol of retaliation and bloodshed to come.
So his death didn't unite the country at all. It just laid its fractures bare for everyone to see. And it left behind the one thing he spent his entire life trying to prevent, a chaotic, totally unpredictable power vacuum. The immediate aftermath was just this mad scramble for control. An interim council was formed, sure, but the real kingmaker, the IRGC, was pushing hard for a quick decision. And their preferred candidate? Khamenei's own son, Moshtaba. And this idea of a dynastic succession was just a massive betrayal of the very principles of the 1979 revolution, which, you remember, was all about overthrowing a monarchy.
So what now? Well, the experts are all over the map. Some are terrified of a total Libya-style collapse into civil war, which in a country the size of Iran would be catastrophic for the entire region. Others argue, maybe counterintuitively, that the regime could use his death to create a martyr story and actually strengthen its grip on power. But there is one thing almost everyone agrees on. The chances for any kind of diplomacy, especially on the nuclear issue, are pretty much zero.
And that's the terrifying paradox here. It's possible that by killing him, his enemies may have handed his successors their most powerful weapon, what you could call the mandate of the martyr. It lets them reframe decades of economic failure and political oppression not as mistakes, but as the necessary price of a heroic struggle that ended with his ultimate sacrifice.
And that, ultimately, is the one massive question his death leaves us with. The entire system was built around one man, his paranoia, his ideology, his story of survival. Now that he's gone, can the fortress he built actually stand on its own? Or was he the only thing holding it all together? The answer to that is going to define the future of Iran and probably the stability of the world.